All right, hello everybody. Welcome to a discussion of the Edan Trilogy. And I'm really excited because this is the first of these discussions that I will be hosting on my channel. And I am so excited and honored to be joined here today by three wonderful people, three very kind people. They've been very kind to me in reading the first two books. All three of them have read The Way of Edan and The Prophet of Edan, and all three of them are actually a fair way into book three, Return to Edan. So this discussion will begin spoiler-free with some spoiler-free comments, questions, and then we will get into spoilers for The Way of Edan, and it will warn you when that happens. And then we'll get into spoilers for The Prophet of Edan. And finally, I think we're going to touch a little bit on Return to Edan, even though they haven't finished it. But if they have questions on that, we will entertain them. So without further ado, let me introduce my three wonderful guests. Next to me on the top, at least as I'm seeing it, is Mary. And Mary has a channel called Mary Reads to Live. And Mary, it is so wonderful to see you again. You've been with me here before on the channel to talk about teaching fantasy, which was one of my favorite discussions.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here and for us to discuss your wonderful book.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And below Mary is John Luke. And John Luke is, I was very, very, very honored and just felt very grateful for the reviews that you put up on Goodreads of the first two books. Very grateful for that. So it's just wonderful and lovely for you to join us on this discussion today. And John Luke, you do not currently have a YouTube channel, but maybe something in the future, you think?
Something in the future. Maybe something in the future. For now, you can just check out my Goodreads. I've got about two people, my mom and my one friend follow me, but you can check it out. So I'm just so grateful to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. And Jarrod is from the Fantasy Thinker. And Jarrod, it's just so great to have you here. You and I have, I think, fairly similar tastes when it comes to, we're a bit old school in some ways, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Like, the gray hair. It's all fair.
A little bit of gray going on, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we're definitely representing the slightly older generation here on book two, which I think is great. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.
So
the thing is, I feel like I know you. I never talked to you before in person, but I feel like I know you just through the action.
That is a weird thing about
it is,
right? That you kind of know people and then you get a chance to talk to them, and it's sort of like a different level, I guess, of interaction, and it's fun. It's really fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely remember my first collaborations on YouTube as being like, wow, this is so cool. And that feeling never really goes away. So, because I think all of us who are here, we love books, we love reading. And all three of you are, in fact, doing some of your own writing. So we might have some writing questions come up as well. But let's go in the same order that I introduced you. And we'll have Mary ask a question that's a non-spoiler. It could be writing related or trilogy, Edan Trilogy related, what have you. So Mary, why don't you lead us off, please?
Oh, thank you. One of the questions that I had in mind as I'm heading into the Return to Edan, and as I'm thinking about everything that's happened so far in this trilogy, is what arc were you the most excited about to write when it comes up to the second book, right? Like that arc, because there was a lot going on at the end of the second book, right? Which character's arc were you the most excited to really delve deep into?
Wow. That's a tough one to answer. A couple spring to mind. So I think Dayraven is an obvious one. And he is if there is a central protagonist to all of this, it's definitely Dayraven. So I had very strong ideas about where his story was going to be heading for all three books, really, which is interesting because I don't know, we'll talk about that later in terms of the order in which characters appear in the third book might appear a bit strange to some people, but I thought that I would go about that. We'll talk about that when we get to Return to Edan, though, because I don't want to spoil anything. But yeah, I'd have to say Dayraven. I had a lot I wanted to do with Sequara, obviously, as well. But Yorman might be an interesting answer as well. I think Yorman is a character that it might sound weird, but I kind of enjoyed exploring his twisted mind. But yeah, I'd say those three are the ones that spring to mind.
I didn't know it was pronounced like that.
Yeah, however you pronounce it is totally fine. So we're very liberal in terms of pronunciations around here. So so thank you so much, Mary. So John Luke, what did you want to ask for a non-spoiler question?
Non-spoiler. I think the thing I've been thinking about a lot is what are your inspirations behind it? I mean, I just to say, as I was reading it, thinking about the priests especially, their whole religion. I grew up in a very religious background, specifically like Christian, evangelical.
Yep.
And so as I'm reading it, I'm like, yeah, I totally see how this could go so wrong and end up like that. You know?
Absolutely.
I've read other books, and where, the whatever analogous to the Catholic and the, way back when they were doing terrible stuff, and they're always the bad guy, and the priests are always like these just absolute out there fanatics. And I think it's not like this. Like, you really see both sides, you see them struggle. And so, yeah, where did you get that, and what was your inspiration behind there?
Yeah, so I have a lot of influences, a lot of inspirations, but specifically in terms of what you're talking about, I also grew up in a Christian household. In fact, I'm the son of a pastor, the grandson of a pastor, and the great-grandson of a pastor. So it is something that is very near and dear to me, in fact. And though I have, evolved in my own thinking, I always will have a fondness for the faith that I grew up in. So it's a fictional religion, of course. The Way of Edan is entirely fictional, and it's obviously got some real world parallels. That's for sure. And I think you're absolutely. I'm glad to hear you say that you feel that there's some complexity in terms of the portrayal of the various representatives of this religion, and some of which I see myself at various stages in my life in several of them. And I hope that I've also given, and I think this becomes more and more evident even by the end of the trilogy, I hope I've given examples of people who live that faith in a way that I feel is beautiful and that is loving. And then the story doesn't necessarily focus on those healthy individuals because, well, I mean, it wouldn't be quite as exciting, I guess. But yeah, there are definitely people, even the ones who, who are, let's say, the word zealot might be applied to them, or the ones who are doubters. I hope what I've been able to achieve is show some complexity and some, as you say, understandable motives in there, because I definitely, this is not a spoiler to say, but I can see a bit of myself at a certain age in Bloodlaw. I can see a bit of myself at a certain age in Yorman. I can see a bit of myself in Arna, all these different expressions of how we grapple with faith. And I think it's important to examine one's faith, and whatever background you come from. That's something that I think in many ways this trilogy was me exploring my feelings about faith, about religion. So it's really central. And it's just coming straight from the heart because of how I grew up and how I consider myself a spiritual person, and someone who is seeking all the time. So I hope that comes through, and I think it's a wonderful question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. I'm glad you feel that way. I really am, because that was it was important to me that it come out that way. And it's a delicate thing to, talk about. And they say avoid, politics and religion when you're talking to people. So it was something I was very conscious that, I better be careful here, but I had to go where my heart led me. And I hope it's an exploration that speaks to people. So of various, faiths and backgrounds or non-faiths even. So yeah.
I grew up Catholic, and so I saw a lot, especially in the very organized
Yeah.
and very the ritualness of it that's not in some of the other Christian faiths.
Yeah.
And so I saw that, and then I saw why I had such an issue with it as I got older, with how that the organization of it
Uh-huh.
became toxic in some ways and really kind of took away from what we were supposed to be getting out of the faith. And it became an excuse for some people to do things that were against the faith and tried to hide behind the fact, oh, this is just the faith. This is what we do.
Yeah.
And I think that you handled that very, very well. And when, because coming from a Catholic background, I think it could be very easy to have read this and be like, what is he talking about? But I took it and I really read it as a love letter in a way to these different faiths. And especially when you have some of these characters struggling with some of these questions, and really at heart, they really love people and the people that they're serving, and they love their faith, and they don't like what's going on with it any more than, the people who are causing the religious war, right? They don't like it any better than they do. And they're trying to do the best they can to help the people that they can help. And I love that. I love that complexity. And I saw that very much. And I feel like in the Catholic faith, there's a lot of that too, where it's like they may not agree with some of the infighting that's going on, or some of the past history of the church, but they've taken the beauty of it, and the beauty of, and the good things that are there, the good things of the rituals, the good things of the bringing together and the helping people, and the love that's there, and turns it and focuses on the good. And I think there's a lot of that in here about the faith. So it's not like, I don't feel like the faith is something that's like, oh, that's terrible faith, let's just put it away, and it's nothing good about it. And I think that's the fine line that you walked there, that I think was done very, very well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's quite a paradox in a way. I mean, that religion has been so important. Faith has been so central and so helpful in many, many people's lives. And yet it's also been used as an excuse by people who are power hungry, or even people who really, really believe that what they're doing is right, and they're harming other people. So it's complex. It's really complex. I guess with all things that involve humans, you see it come out in beautiful ways and in horrible ways, and that just seems to be the way we do things. And I think the stakes do become greater when a religion becomes established, when it becomes an institution. And then you get this power creep, this power creeps into the situation. And it can be hard for a person who's genuine and sincere to exist within an organization where that power has become a factor. So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, that power of the organization, your setup kind of reminded me of medieval times with the main church, in the 12th and 13th centuries. I got that feeling because you had the power of the king,
Yeah.
Erkenwald, is that his name, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
and Bledla, and they didn't always see eye to eye, even though the king was using that power, that name, in order to further his goals, and so was this Way of Edan at Bledla, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's what it reminded me of, and so some of that, because I know you're into history too, so I think some of the influence was in there on that level too. And you also mixed in the some of the it wasn't just that, there was also other views on the religion as well, with the spiritual side, with the
Yeah. There are actually 4 religions in the trilogy. The one that people think of the most is the Way of Edan, but there's also the Andumaic dualistic faith.
Yes.
There's a father and a mother. There is the old religion of which you still see practiced in the Mark of Day-Raven's ancestors, and the ancestral religion of even the Torlanders, who have rejected that polytheistic faith. So there's a pantheon of gods there. And that's really what Aldmund was the fellow who started the Way. One of his just central ideas is actually, no, there's one God, and that was one of his big revelations, and that was part of what started the Way. Although I tend to think that what happens with, so he left behind some writing, and that writing gets scrutinized and interpreted and analyzed, and maybe some of the things he intended, or some of the things that resulted, were not things that he actually intended, in his writing. But that evolves over hundreds of years. And then, of course, there's the Dwergs, who don't have gods; they have ancestor worship. That's the 4th one.
I love the different views of religion and how that comes up in your characters and how they share that almost with each other, right? The different views of it throughout history, and they can share that with each other. One of the things I thought was very interesting was the way that the history being passed down and is in your story in front and center, like with the songs that are passed down, the religions that are passed down, the works, the writings that are passed down, and even the rituals that are passed down that are all different. It makes the world feel very organic and very like you could touch it. I mean, I hate to say Tolkien-esque because Tolkien was the only one that did this, but you know what I mean. Like it makes it very tangible. Like it feels like there's books of history out there still on these different things that we just haven't read yet. And I think that makes it very exciting and to read. And I think it makes your characters also feel very grounded in the world in a way that I think as a writer, I really appreciated and strive to do in my own work.
Thank you. Yeah, that was definitely a goal. And I spent a lot of time puttering around in this world before I even started writing the story. First thing I did was draw a map, and then I wrote out a history of the world, and I wrote mythologies and all kinds of crazy stuff, and developed each of the religions, did enough with the languages to at least make them seem like they could be real languages. That was a world building approach for sure.
Which is I feel like that's one thing that makes it feel very organic to me, is how they're switching back and forth. It gets super confusing, and I have to keep going back and say, okay, where are they? What are they talking about? But that feels so organic that some speak some languages, some don't speak some languages. How much of that do you have of each language?
Well, I cheated, I should say. I based the languages in my world on languages that I actually know. So, for example, Andumaic is pretty closely based on Nepali, or a South Asian kind of language. So anybody who speaks Hindi, or even probably Sanskrit, certainly Nepali, would read the bits of Andumaic and say, I know what that means, I think. So it's kind of not exact word for word. So I've tweaked it to some degree, but they'd be like, I think I know what he's doing there. Same thing with Ondunic, which is based on Welsh, at least the sounds of Welsh. I was probably a little further away from the actual Welsh language in that case. The language of the Theos is closely based on Old Norse. And because the Torlanders and the people of the Mark and Elend speak what I call the Northern tongue, and that's the dominant language in Jormungand. But if you were to hear it spoken, if you were from the perspective of let's say an outsider who doesn't know the Northern tongue, it would look kind of like Old English, is the idea there. Oh yes, and then over on the Wildlands, the Ilarchai, as they're called, or as the folk of the tribes, as they prefer to call themselves, their language is a kind of Proto-Germanic. It's all of it is sort of kind of based on languages that I know, and so I cheated, and that's the short answer. Yeah.
3 or 4 languages. I'm still grasping English, so
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love languages, and a lot of what I do is I can't say I'm like Tolkien, who really invented like entire languages, 2 forms of Elvish and whatnot, and I didn't go as far as he did, but I hope I've given at least the illusion that these languages could be real. So yeah, that was the goal. Yeah. Great, Jarrod. Did you have a non-spoiler question you wanted to ask?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. So you previously said you worked on this for like 18 years or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or going on 20 now, right?
And
And
more like 19 plus. Yeah, now. Yeah.
so I'm just curious as how do you keep your focus on a single big project like that for that long a time without because I know myself, I'd be like, okay, I gotta work on something. I can't do this anymore. How do you keep focus on something like that for such a long time and then have it come to this fruition that you've brought up?
Yeah. Wow. The first word that comes to mind is passion. I just, I read Lord of the Rings when I was about 12, and that awakened something in me that just hasn't gone away. And just, I feel that a lot of my life path after reading that wonderful story has been a result of me wanting to duplicate that feat that Tolkien, I said to myself, even as a kid, that's what I want to do. I want to give people something like and I didn't know the word catharsis back then, but, I wanted to do that thing that I felt as a kid and have felt many times since reading great stories. You and I, Jarrod, share a passion for Malazan, for example. And I've experienced, a sense of the sublime reading Malazan. And I just wanted to try to do that. I guess that's what motivated me really when it comes down to it, is trying to touch the sublime and hopefully in a way that makes sense to other people who can understand what I was trying to do. So yeah. Yep.
In my opinion, I think you succeeded. When I read this, I feel like I'm transported to another world. I get that feeling of excitement and exploration, and so I think that that's very much, I get the very similar vibe and feeling when I'm reading, go back and rereading the Lord of the Rings and things like that. So I get a very feeling here like, oh, I'm coming to a place that I know. I'm coming to a place that I've come to really love. And I think I get that feeling in these books. So I think you succeeded in that, at least for me as a reader.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, if I succeed with even, one reader, then I think, okay, I must have done something right there. Yeah. So cool.
Yeah, I had the maddest of respect to accomplish a project this size. I've only done short stories, so I've tried to do the novel thing, and it's just I always lose my focus, and I was like, it's amazing that you can keep that.
It does. For me, I'm a planner. I tend to be very organized, and that helps me. So like I said, I did all that stuff preliminary, and I had an outline for each of the books before I started writing. So I pretty much knew where everything was going. Although as you write, sometimes the story tells you, no, we're actually going to go here. And you don't realize that you're going to do that ahead of time. But the story, you can't ignore the story when it's talking to you. So
yeah. Cool.
So thank you guys, and let's move on to, I guess, spoilers for book 1, The Way of Edan. And once again, we'll let Mary start with a spoiler-oriented question or observation for The Way of Edan.
All right. One question that I had about The Way of Edan is that when you started the first book, when you were starting that, did you have the elven influence, like how the elven influence is going to see throughout the first and second book? Like, did you have that mapped out already, and so you kind of knew where you were going, or was it something that you discovered as you were writing that awesome scene in the forest where the elf kind of comes into play?
That's something I knew I was going to do. That was pretty much mapped out, and that was based on a couple things. One is the mention of elves in Old English poetry and there's a mention of elves in Beowulf, for example, and it's listed among all these really terrifying, monstrous creatures, right? And so the idea that elves are not just beautiful, but really scary is, and something just, foreign to humans and that sort of thing. That's something I took from Old English poetry, and I wanted to go back to some. Now, I love Tolkien's elves. I think they're just gorgeous. They're beautiful. When I think of Tolkien, one of the first words I think of is beauty. So I don't want to. This is not to disparage what he has achieved with his elves, but I want to go back to something maybe a little bit older, and the idea that elves could be terrifying, as well as beautiful. So that was part of the inspiration. Also, I think it's fair to say that underlying a lot of the magic in this world, which you very much begin to see in the Way of Edan, and the elves are in some way, shape, or form connected to this magic, is a kind of Buddhist philosophy, and that's something that the idea of oneness, that everything that lives, everything in this world is connected. That's a big influence, and also the concept that everything is fleeting, that we're essentially, we're going to die someday. We have to face our mortality, and that is not necessarily a terrible thing if you have a sense of belonging to all the people around you and all of the creatures around you, the world around you. So there's a sense of transcending the self and being part of this world in that underlying philosophy, I suppose. So that's kind of where I also wanted to incorporate into the elf, was this sense of transcendence based on actually very an experience I had as a teenager. And I used to, as a teen, I used to read the Bible every day. I read through the Bible many times. Used to pray for extended periods of time. And a couple of times as I was praying, I had this incredible transcendental experience. And it was like I was floating above the whole world and I was part of everything. And I can never forget that experience. I'm sure there are various, ways of explaining that to people, and I think for me it's still a grand mystery, and it's something that maybe writing this trilogy was me trying to figure out just what happened there. So but it was an incredibly beautiful, sublime experience, that sense of oneness with the world, in the sense that I'm part of it. So yeah,
I definitely got a feeling that Dave Raven did have a very much a religious experience of his own, like that feeling that this was an experience that only not just anyone has had, but I think it was it felt like a religious experience just like any other that is throughout the book. And I think that this is something that really sets him apart, is that there's all these other religions going on, and there's this religious war, coming up, and especially in the first book where it's stewing and it's about to start. And I think it really sets him apart from that, to be like, this is why he is going to be a focus, is because he had his own religious experience right from the very beginning that's going to really I would say almost transcend what's happening. And I think that that's really cool. I think that it really does give that feeling. So I love to hear that inspiration.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, John Luke, a Way of Edan related question.
Related question, to comment on Mary's question and what she said. I had this feeling reading it, that same kind of feeling that Dave Raven almost has his own religion going on. Like, he realizes this is not the same thing as either the old religion that he followed or like, he realizes there's something bigger going on here, after his experience with the elf.
Definitely.
With the elf, then I think my question as I was reading it was, does he actually have something different than like the Song of Origin?
Okay, yes. So that's a great question. I think a lot of readers have a similar kind of question. The way I think of it, and I'm open to other interpretations, I think of it as a matter of degree. In other words, it's distinctly possible that, well, this is more of a Prophet of Edan moment, I guess, but the songs of origin, let's put it this way. The songs of origin are necessary for the humans who access this, the world of origins, right? This time, this place outside of space and time. It's a transcendent place, let's put it that way. The songs of origin are vital for helping the magic wielder to maintain a sense of self, which is important, because I hope one thing that came across here is that this magic is dangerous, and you can lose yourself. In the same way that when Dayraven is the only person who has ever survived an encounter with an elf, the reason being, when you encounter an elf, your essentially spirit, whatever you want to call it, is brought outside and dissipates into the universe, and all that's left is your body. So yeah, it's not something that people really wanted to experience for the most part. But yeah, somehow Dayraven survives that. I think that is just a matter of degree, right? So what people are doing when they're using the gift is they are entering into a similar state of realization, a similar state of perception that is outside of time and space. Or let's say that the part of them is at least in tune with it. But the song of origin helps them to stay anchored to the world of forms, what I call the world of forms, the world of flesh and blood and things. So that's how I think of it as working. And so it's really just a matter of degree. Like the elf is like normal use of the gift is somewhere down here, and an encounter with an elf puts you way up here. And it's not something that the real mystery really is, why does Dayraven survive this encounter when everyone else doesn't? That's the real mystery, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that answers my question. Because it seems like Dayraven believes it's something totally different than.
Yeah. He does, and it's because it is just so vast and it's so overwhelming that I mean, he had the gift to begin with, so he could have been, a wizard or a priest or whatever, regardless, if he had been trained to use it. And I hope that comes across early in the Way of Edan, that he has this gift of empathy, that he feels, and that somehow even had the little squirrel, in the beginning, where he encounters a squirrel, and even Ebba's kind of like, why did creatures do that with you? So he has it's present, that sense of going outside of oneself and connecting with another being is something that he already has. But with the elf, it's just way too big, so.
I always wondered if that had something to do with why he survived, and because he is able to put himself out there on a regular basis and come back to himself. Like he can go out and have so much empathy for other people, other beings, and then be able to still connect to back to them, but also to himself. And I just, in my mind, it always like, I wonder if that's why Dayraven's already a little bit by little bit already kind of using that gift. So he's used to that. And when most people, they're experiencing the elf, they just be like, it's the first time I'm experiencing this, and so of course they're not going to be able to find their way back. So I think that was my take on it. But
yeah, it's a thought. Yeah. John Luke?
I thought that was so genius, because when he held his hand out and the squirrel ran up to him, I was like, oh, his magic power is animals like him. I totally like him. I'm in. Let's go.
Same.
Yeah, I wish in some way I had an animal companion. I mean, he has his horse that he loves. I do have one though in the sequel that I've written, a standalone sequel. So there will be an animal companion in that book. But yeah.
So excited for that.
Yeah. Cool. So let's see, Jarrod, a question about the Way of Edan.
Well, kind of tying into what you said about the elf. But you're like you play a lot around with sentience in these volumes, all these volumes, and I think and I also you also play around with some common tropes. Well, I mean, Day Raven is like the chosen one type, and you have some other common tropes that you really seem of, like the wars, what you call dwags. I think I said that right. Right? But the elf, was there another name for the elf that you had considered? Or because I don't, it just says elf. And how did you decide to like just use elf instead of another name from, some kind of historical reference like you did with dwarves? And the same thing with like the puka and the troll. You use troll. And how does um like the priests of Edan are able to control some of these creatures? And in the first book, you have Bledla, I think, trying to get into the mind of a person,
Right.
a human, and he's having trouble with that without killing the guy, or what. I don't remember the scene exactly, but he was almost torturing this.
Oh, I think it was torture. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how did you decide like the level, like the level of the power of the magic in the Song of Origin related to sentience of the creatures that were being controlled?
Yeah.
Because that plays into the Prophet as well, but
Right.
big time. And so that was fascinating to me that you had there seems to be some line of sentience in there with these various creatures. Animals were a lot easier to control, obviously,
Right.
than some of the other creatures. But I was wondering how you went about deciding that. Could we see some in the Way of Edan, and then we see some more in Prophet of Edan later on?
Right.
And that was fascinating to me. About that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do probably with the level of complexity of the mind of the creature. So a squirrel is easier to control using a Song of Origin than, say, a dolphin, right? Because the dolphin has a much more complex mind. And yeah, I think a human mind is more complex than most other creatures in the world. Most of us have slightly more going on in here all the time, which is good and bad, I guess. But so a human mind is much harder to control. And with Bledla in that scene, which is definitely torture, he's not concerned about he's concerned about the truth. He's concerned about the big goal, which is for him establishing the kingdom of the eternal. And this person is in the way, and therefore, it's too bad, but we got to get what we can. And he's actually looking for something that's not there. That's why he doesn't find it. He's scouring this person's mind for information about who he was supposed to meet and so on and so forth. And it's not there because this person wasn't told that information. So Bledla wants something very much that's not there. And unfortunately for that character, it results in a pretty awful death, which, by the way, Bledla experiences along with him. So that should tell you something about the level of devotion, if you want to call it that he has, that he is willing to experience death in order to further the cause that he has dedicated his life to. So he believes that much.
Did that, because in this volume, I was just wondering if that led to any breakthroughs in Bledla's power to, because he seemed to be a bit more powerful in Prophet than when we first see him in Way of Edan. Did that lead to any breakthroughs in his, proficiency in magic?
It's hard to say. I think one thing that's at least knocking around in my head is the idea, and you see this a bit when Yormon has an encounter with Arna in the Way of Edan, is the notion that the longer you're around and the more you use the gift, the like anything really, the better you get at it. So certainly more practice equals greater capacity to use the gift, maybe even an expansion of power as well, which is, I think that's probably how that might work. So,
Yeah.
cool.
And what's the real world connotation of puka? Is it like where's that term come from?
Which term?
The puka, in the little.
Oh, that. Oh, yes. Okay, great. Do you want to ask me a
Yeah.
linguistic question? So be careful, because I will go on and on. So puka is related to the word puck, actually, the character puck. It's basically in Old English. It's the sense of a little monster, right?
Yeah.
And Aglak as well is basically what is Grendel is referred to, and Grendel's mother repeatedly referred to as something Aglach in Old English. So I stole that from there. Dwergs, and if dwergs were from Boston, your pronunciation would be perfect, Jarrod. But dwergs are basically, that is the Old English. It's derived from the Old English word for dwarf. Dwarf is actually an Old Norse-based word.
Mhm.
And for whatever reason, in the history of our language, we adopted, like a lot of other, there's a Viking infusion in English when the Vikings invaded, and there was a Danelaw and all that. So there are certain words that we have that are actually surprisingly basic to the language, that are important. Among those words, though, we for whatever reason, the Norse word displaced the native Old English word. But you do see it occasionally, that Old English word in Tolkien's work. Like anytime there's the Dwero Delph or something like that, he's using the Old English in that case. But he uses obviously dwarf and dwarves in his writing, which is, that's what we got. So I just thought, let me just put a little spin on that. And I'll use the Old English term for them. It's the same bunch of people, though. As for elf, that's Old English derived, and I didn't need to change that. I didn't think because I thought this is my nod to Old English poetry. This is I want to give a sense of the elf as being something otherworldly, something terrifying and beautiful simultaneously, which is kind of how I read it when I come across the word in Old English poetry. So, yeah.
The puka, I imagine them as those, there's like creepy lemurs with the big eyes.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So I don't know what those are called, but you know what I mean. They've got like huge eyes and they're long fingers, and they're.
Are those the ones with the striped tail? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. In Sing 2, my kids love Sing 2, and there's this like scene, and there's just like giant big eye thing, and I'm like, that's the puka.
That's funny.
I
Yeah,
thought of them as like little goblins.
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. And with go ahead, Mary.
No, good thing. I'm very glad to get confirmation on that, because what the little bit of Old English that I know just from reading it, as a literature major, I was wondering if that's where puka came from. So I was like, and I like that rang true as part of that, but I'm not as learned about it as you are. So that's good to have that confirmation though.
Yeah. Yep. That's where that is. Yeah. So are you guys ready to move on to the Prophet of Edan? All right, let's do it. Mary, your observation, question, whatever you like on, so this is spoilers for the Prophet of Edan.
My question about the Prophet of Edan is...
Hold up the book.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jarrod. Yeah.
My observation is that I feel like Dayraven and Sequara have their coming of age journey in the first one, and then in the second one it feels as if they are coming to that, we are coming into our own, we're taking the responsibility for things that we need to take responsibility for, and we're really developing a very core of themselves, I think, as adults in this, even though I think Sequara, that they were adults before this, but it just felt like at this point in their lives, this is where their lives are taking shape. And I was wondering, when it comes to Sequara and was there a trajectory for her character that was different and that changed as you were writing her character when it came from in the second book than what you had originally planned for her? Like, how did her character kind of change? I felt like there was a lot of change going on in both characters, but I was very curious as to see like what was important to you that changed in her character, and even as you were writing, what changed and you were thought about her as you created her in the second book that you thought you really wanted to bring out in the book?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So I think of the three books as, and if we put it in the broadest possible hero's journey kind of terms, like as in Joseph Campbell and all of that, I think of the three books as the first book being the departure, and the second book being transcendence, and the third book being the return. And that is most neatly mapped onto Dayraven's arc, I believe. But I think Sequara's arc fits it pretty well too. And in many ways, to me, Sequara is arguably the hero of this whole trilogy. In some ways, I think she is. She's a character that I wanted to explore a deep conflict within her. She sees herself as a healer. That's obvious from the beginning. The first time we meet her, she heals a little girl. And that's in contrast to what happened in the previous chapter where a boy loses his life, or even in the prologue where the three priests lose their lives. Now they martyr themselves. But Sequara heals a girl. And I'm trying to send a message about her right from the beginning, that she sees herself as a healer. But her duty as the future queen of Astrolad, and now with what happens in the Prophet of Edan with the death of Faldira, she's the queen. So her duty is to protect her home. And that means, and it's a very difficult question, I suppose, but for someone who sees herself as a healer, how do you reconcile yourself to this role of essentially having to, yes, defend, but in the process of defending, you're taking lives. She commits violence in order to accomplish the goal of defending her home. And this is not something she ever wanted to do. So that conflict is something with Sequara that I'm really, and with this the deep grief that she experiences, not only for the death of Faldira and Urd, but also the sacking of Astrolad. And again, she's in this terrible place of conflict because on the one hand, her immediate instinct is, of course, to save her home. But to accomplish that, and because of her personal attachment to Dayraven, the other urge is, I got to save Dayraven right now. And that means running away from the place that I should be defending. So she has all these conflicts in her, and I find that fascinating. William Faulkner's very well-known, justifiably well-known quote about there's nothing worth writing about but the human heart in conflict with itself. I hope that Sequara's conflicts make her an interesting character. I really like her a lot. I think she's a good person doing the best she can and with what she's been given, and all of this too. I mean, another conflict within her is she comes from a poor farm, and she's becoming the queen of the realm, which is unusual in this society, unheard of, but unusual because there's this, there are a group of noble houses that normally supply the heir to the throne. That's how it works in the Andumaic kingdoms. So she's a character who's full of these conflicts. And so that's what I wanted to explore with her. And I think that Prophet is really the heart of where we see Sequara having to confront this conflict. Am I a healer or am I going to be a warrior now?
And I think that that's so beautifully said, because that's how I got the feeling of, she starts to realize that to be the healer that my people needs me to be, to heal my people, to heal my nation, sometimes I have to do a little bit of both.
Yep.
And to heal, sometimes you have to destroy, right? Like when we have to lose a limb, whenever we're sick and we have, like, sometimes we feel worse before we feel better. It's that kind of balance, I think, that really in her that I think is just beautiful. And she has so much strength in her, and I feel like I really connected to her so much in this book, and she's like my favorite character. Probably I've read about in a long time, because you don't shy away from letting her have vulnerabilities just to show how strong she is. And I think that that's a mistake that some writers and movies do, is they try to make their heroine like without any vulnerabilities, to try to be tough. And she doesn't need that. She's tough just as she is. And I think that's beautiful. And I love the trajectory I'm seeing in the Return to Edan. I'm not going to get into that yet, but I love how that's also something that really starts to blossom even more when what I see in Return of Edan, and the decisions that she has to make, and the fact that she can make those decisions is just beautiful. And so that's I love her trajectory, and I love the fact that she had those complexities, and that you had that in mind from the start, that you wanted to explore the human heart with her, because I think that's really where you get that in the story from her perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that you connected with her. Yeah. John Luke, Prophet of Edan.
First, to go back and comment, I really connected with Sakura as well, and with all the characters, and something I thought you did really well is in this book, and one of the themes of the book, I assume, is balancing their purpose versus their want. Like, what do they need versus what do they feel like they should do versus what they want to do. I think that Sakura's her guard, when he gives that line, something to the effect of, "I'm lucky because my purpose is simple." Is that what he said?
That's perfect. Yeah, that's Jarrod. Yes. It's exactly what he says. Yep.
I thought, yep, that is exactly it. And so now, kind of moving on, my question is Orvandil. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Great. How? What is his? I guess, what is his purpose, or what is his reason for sticking with David?
Good. Yeah. This is another character I really love. And I think if this maybe were a different sort of trilogy, Orvandil could have been the hero in some ways. But he's a man who is a warrior. And he comes from a warrior culture. The Thioths are traditionally, they're in that kind of beginning of this transition from a warrior culture to slightly becoming a little bit more civilized, maybe. So, but that their ethos is basically, it's about courage, right? It's about loyalty. It's something you would see like among the Vikings or in Old English poetry. It's about doing great deeds of valor, so the bard will sing tales of your glory and that sort of thing. I mean, that's how they dealt with mortality, right? So he's a representative of that, but he's also a thinking and feeling person. He's done some things in his life that you learn about in the Prophet of Edan that he deeply regrets. He killed his foster brother, and it was over a woman. And so it was a stupid thing that he did, but it's just that act has become a central part of the way he sees himself as essentially a killer, as not a murderer per se, because all the killing he's done has been in combat or in a duel that's agreed upon according to the rules of that society. So he does give himself that distinction, but he feels a kind of ultimate futility to this, that in all this killing, yes, he feels alive in the midst of battle, but he feels empty afterwards. And he sees, he's basically resigned to this until he meets Dayraven. And Dayraven gives him a picture, he feels, of what he could be, of something nobler, of someone who not is a killer, but is somebody who can foster life, someone who can make a difference, someone who can help. And he wants to be that so much. He wants to be that, not just a killer. And so that's why he follows Dayraven, because Dayraven, that's one of the qualities that Dayraven seems to have, particularly after the elf somewhat magnifies this, I guess, is that Orvindil sees his potential self when he meets Dayraven. He feels it. Like, that's what Dayraven sees in me, and I want to be that, right? So that's, I think, a big part of his motive. But he's also stuck in this role of being, as we see in the Prophet of Edan, his great act is to kill a dragon, which was foreshadowed when way back early in the book, when Aben the Bard tells the story of the old gods, where they the one god, the leader of the gods, has the the blacksmith god make a super weapon that he hurls into the mouth of the primeval dragon Hringvolnir, and that dragon is what they make the world out of. That's a kind of little me playing around, foreshadowing what Orvindil's going to do in the battle of Thulhan, where he kills a dragon. And then he kills, and by the way, when he kills that dragon, he's not, he's like, geez, I feel kind of sad about this, right? That creature did not want to be here, and I'll probably never have anything like that in my life again. And then he kills, guess who? Dayraven's father. And again, that's yeah, I mean, that, by the way, that's something they do a lot in Old English poetry and in Old Norse sagas, is they put characters into these terrible situations where they have to choose one bad thing or another, and it's just awful. And that's what Orvindil's been thrown into here, using the man's own sword, which is how he thinks Orvindil's some random guy who's killed his son. He is put into this conflict, which I think puts Orvindil back into this mindset of, geez, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here. Especially this guy right here. So that's again, human heart in conflict with itself kind of situation. So
on that note, I think Orvindil's character path, kind of the opposite mirror of Sakara's.
True.
Because he went from violence to thinking beyond that and trying to do something more, whereas she went from healing and had to turn to violence.
Yeah,
that was beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, that's pretty cool to see them. Yeah, and they meet along the way somewhere too. John Luke, did you want to follow up on that?
Well, just one comment about the editing of your book. I think the songs and the poems, really like them, and I really appreciate that they weren't italicized, because definitely the person where if I see that italicized block, my eyes just like glaze over. It just went so seamlessly with the rest of the text. It wasn't like this, like taking you out of it, and it really had to do with what was happening. I just really appreciated that reading it.
Thank you so much. I am so glad to hear, because not everybody agrees, and that was definitely my goal. And this is, again, a nod to Old English poetry. If you read Beowulf, for example, there are all these little side stories, these stories within the story, but they're not random. They're not there to interrupt. They're there to enhance the story. They're thematic echoes. And what I'm trying to do with these little poems and stories and everything else is I'm trying to say, these are the themes I'm wrestling with here. Even when Dayraven back in the first book tells a story to Ebba, his fiance, it's a story that, if you look closely, there are themes there that are basically foreshadowing a lot of what's going to be happening in the books. And I try to do that with each of these, like with the story of the primeval dragon being a foreshadowing of Orvindil's battle prowess. So yeah, it's something that I'm trying to incorporate as another way of looking at, like, the theme of exile, the story of Alfsheen that Aben tells over the course of several days with the mercenary company. It's a story essentially of exile. Dayraven is in exile. Gnorn and Hlock are exiles. That's a theme I'm constantly exploring, is exile and identity, and what it means to have that taken away from you. So I'm glad that you appreciated those. Yeah, cool. So Jarrod, a Prophet of Edan related observation or question.
Well, this is super spoiler as deal at the very end.
Okay, well,
But
we're spoiling Prophet right
uh,
now. So, yeah.
but you basically have this total makeover of Day Raven at the end of this book.
Yeah.
He becomes, he becomes this prophet, and he kind of, he's not the same person really. He's kind of has this internal battle now with constantly with the elf, and he's looked on differently by the people, and he's definitely not, he's not the guy he was. He becomes a different person, and that kind of threw me for a loop when at that ending right there. I was like, oh wow, this is different. And I was wondering, because he showed this immense power by taking over the big, and by basically burning Ledler's will and overcoming that part of saving the day sort of.
Right.
So was that ending a way to um kind of curb his power so that he doesn't become like this superhero in the third book, or um and was that planned out like that, or did that grow organically from writing into it? And I was wondering how you approach that as well, because that was like I said, it threw me for a loop a little bit. I was like, oh wow, that's different, and I appreciate that, and so it made the beginning of the next book, what's going to happen now? It really wanted me to get to that next book.
Yeah, I think a lot of people read the ending of the Prophet of Edan and think, wait, what? There's more, because it feels like an ending to a traditional fantasy story in many ways. And
Yeah, until he gets to that point where he doesn't know who he is, and it's like,
yeah,
whoa, okay.
Yeah. So Day Raven triumphs at the battle. Everything's great. The bad guy Bledla is defeated, and he's even done in by Erkenwald there in a surprise moment. I hope I surprised some readers with that. Yeah, so that would be the ending in a lot of cases, which is Day Raven's great sacrifice. But I wanted to do something different, and that's really what Return to Edan is I think where I take the biggest risks, where I go off the rails and do some exploring. Because I think often I mentioned those three parts to a hero's journey. And it feels like to me that in a lot of stories, the departure is very well addressed. The transcendence is definitely usually the biggest part of a story, and then the return is something they mention just at the very end, and it's not really given much attention. What I'm really interested in exploring are the consequences. What are the consequences of an individual like Day Raven giving everything, sacrificing his very identity? There should be a consequence to that. It shouldn't be, and he lived happily ever after. I feel like, wait, there's so much more to explore now. Because here's this guy, he's given everything. What happens to him now? What about the world that's been thrown in turmoil? Now, every place that I know of in history that has been ravaged by war, they don't wake up one day and say, well, war is over, let's get back to normal. There is a period of chaos, a period of terrible difficulty. And that recovery isn't something that happens easily. So I want to look at that. Like, what's happening now in this world that has been ravaged by this war? What chaos and instability have crept in now because of this war? Yes, the War of the Way ends, so to speak, at the end of the Prophet of Edan, but there's a lot of other things that are not resolved. And so I want to explore those things, maybe in a way that's not traditionally done. So yeah, Return to Edan is where I think I kind of just let myself take a few risks and do things. I hope it's my favorite book of the three, and I hope other people will say, oh, that's interesting. That's and so far the people who finished it, I'm hearing that they've enjoyed that. So I'm glad.
Well, you had a great big ending in Prophet, and then you leave us a great big mystery. So
Yeah.
I think that hell first outing very cool.
Yep.
One of
Cool.
the things I really love about your cover of the book, if you can see it with my filter here,
Yeah.
is you have Sakura with the fire, with light in her hands and the dark in the background. And I feel like it's very much of an image of what the world is like right now. There's little bits of light and hope, but it's still really dark right now.
Yeah.
And so I like that imagery.
Yeah. That's Saren there. But
Is
yeah,
that Saren? Oh, that is
Yeah.
Saren. I'm sorry.
that's Saren.
Yeah, Saren. Okay.
So yeah, no, that's a wonderful observation, Mary. I love that. And that is definitely what I'm going for. In addition to, I think, at least the way I feel is that Return to Edan of the three has the darkest tone to it. I'm not talking about the cover, I'm talking about what's inside.
Yeah.
I also hope, though, that it has the biggest sense of transcendence and perhaps beauty as well. So that's something I also wanted to convey. Look, there are lights up there,
Mhm.
and they're part of this swirling kind of sky going on in here. And we're connected to those lights, and there's a little light down here to kind of reflect them, so hopefully, I don't know if any of you got into this scene yet or not.
Yeah. Now that you say that, I know exactly what scene that is. So
Yeah, it's song related too,
Yeah.
because Saren is a singer, and it's one of my favorite scenes in the whole trilogy, actually. But yeah, so I guess we're talking about Return to Edan now. So spoilers
No,
for
sorry.
Return. Probably just the first couple hundred pages, though, because these three have not finished it yet. But Mary, Return to Edan.
I felt like at first when I first started it, I was surprised in the first chapter, like where you started with it. But then I immediately, because I've read your other books and I know, in a way, I feel like I know where your interest and your heart lies when it comes to telling stories. So I was like, okay, he's really showing the aftermath, what's going on with this world and these people, and so he's adding in these elements and these characters to kind of show us that. And so I really, really enjoyed that. But I've only read like first 130 pages, so I'm very interested in the character that we just talked about that's on the cover. I'm very interested in to see their arc of like what happens with the story. But I also really love where Sakura is getting to in the beginning of this. From what I see, she's conflicted as she always is. My poor love, she's having to make hard decisions. It never gets easier for her. But I love that she's not giving up, right? She's not giving up, and that's my really observation more than a question. She's not giving up. She's just like, okay, I'm going to help David in my own way. Me going out there and searching for him is not going to do him any more good than if I'm in my own way spiritually trying to bring him back, right? And so I think that that's just a wonderful way for her to kind of stay connected to her home and what she's doing, but also still connected to Dayrhaven. So as a writer, I think that was a very, very good move on how to still connect her to the main to Dayrhaven, our one of our main characters, but also have her own arc of like she kind of the scourging of the Shire moment where she has to go and get her home back. So I'm excited to see that. That's my main excitement, is to see her go home and see what's going on there, and for her to start coming in as a queen, because she hasn't come home as a queen yet before. And so I'm really excited to see, does she accept being queen, or does she, what does she actually decide to do? Where does this all conflict come into play? And so I'm excited for that in the Return of Edan. And I think I'm so happy that you have made this more complex than the ending for her we got in the second one. I thought it was a great ending for her, because she didn't decide. She's not, I'm going to throw away everything and be with you, Dayrhaven. She didn't do that. She's like, no, I can't. I love you, but I can't, right now. It's more complicated than that. I need time. And he gives her that space, which, thank you. It's beautiful. But there's consequences to that. And I think now we're dealing with those consequences. And I can't wait to really see where those decisions end up. So I'm glad that wasn't the end, because I think there was so much to explore with those characters.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very, very important to me that Sakura have her own arc, and that it is something that I tried my best to bring to a very clear conclusion. And so I hope that you'll enjoy that part of this. It was some of the most emotional parts of the book really are with Sequara for me. So we'll see what you think, and I will be very keen to hear it, Mary. So yeah.
You know me, I'll tell you.
Good. I'm counting on it. Yeah. So, John Luke, what do you think so far of Return to Edan?
By far my favorite.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And I loved, the first two. I thought something you did so well was with the format and the plot. It was very traditional and in a way that I really liked. Like I thought I expected the things to happen. The things to happen I was expecting happen
Right.
in a way that were so satisfying. And you inserted the themes so well into this kind of, action adventure travelogue. Like I think J.R. Tolkien did, and like in some of the older kind of books that really fit with in the genre. Like the dragon at the end, when Dayraven, you have all this religion and all these like themes of life and death. And then when Dayraven was going off, I was like, he's gonna fly in on the dragon. And then at the end he did, and I was like, yep, that was badass. Yep. And then and so going to this one, there's such a shift. So my question is, as a writer, how did you choose the perspectives that are linked? I mean, I'm 200 pages in and we've had 8 perspectives and none of them are Dayraven. How do you choose the characters that we're going to follow?
Yeah, so that's a great writer question. What I'm trying to do, and I'll see if it works. I've had some feedback, people telling me, yeah, this really worked. So we'll see. Maybe others will disagree. I'm trying to increase the stakes. I'm trying to increase the tension because Dayraven doesn't, except for the prologue, he doesn't appear for the first couple hundred pages. And what is going on with Dayraven? And you get these hints, like Sequara has a true dream. Galdor and Aben and Gnorn and Orvindil are pursuing him, and they're seeing all the signs of his passage, which are pretty like mind-blowing. All these people who are responding to him either with a sense of overwhelming beauty and wonder, or with a sense of just depending on who they are. But if they've been mean people, they tend to respond to Dayraven with a sense of terror as well. So Dayraven's doing something to people as he passes through. It's like he's leaving this huge swath in his wake of spiritual experiences that people are having. So he's like a magnet of some kind. And so, yeah, I hope that is increasing that sense of anticipation. And when he finally does arrive, what is going on with him? That sort of thing. And he's in the midst of this monumental struggle because he has this being inside his mind that if you could put yourself, none of us can do this, but if you could put yourself in the perspective of an ethereal, timeless being, okay? And you're looking at planet Earth, let's say, and you are looking at the history, all of Earth's history at once, and you probably are going to come to a conclusion about, well, which certainly of the current inhabitants of this planet have been the most destructive, have been the most, have dealt out the most suffering. And I think we human beings are probably easily, the answer to that question. We've dealt out so much suffering to ourselves, to other creatures. And you might come to the conclusion that, well, maybe this planet would be better off without these. Maybe humans are like a kind of cancer on this planet. And you can understand that perspective. I mean, that's almost kind of logical. It's a bit cold from our perspective, but it's a bit logical. Dayraven's struggle is, can he affirm that humanity is worth it? That we have the potential to create beauty and love and wonder in this world? Do we have that potential, and does that offset the destruction that we've caused? And this is the struggle that's going on, and it's playing out as he encounters all these people. And I think it's a legitimate question. Are we human beings redeemable, right? As a species? And I think we're still finding out the answer to that question. But it's a heroic struggle to affirm that, yes, we are capable of beauty and love and goodness in this world. So that's what I'm trying to basically lead up to with Dayraven. His arrival is, he's in the midst of this debate going on between the elf and the human side of him, which is diminishing, so yeah, there it is. Did I answer your question?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Jarrod,
Yes.
what do you think so far? Return.
Well, when I got into the prologue, something dawned on me about the prologues in all three of these. They're each quite different from each other.
Yeah.
Like the Way of Edan sets up like the fanaticism that can happen with this Way of Edan, and even a mob mentality, how they get stoned down and stuff, and it also sets up the story for some discovery later on. And then with Prophet, we got this action-packed prologue, with the dragons and all that stuff, and the whole book was action-packed with this big war going on and stuff like that. And then in return, the prologue is more subtle, in a pastoral way. But it has this profound like undercurrent of future, and so I was wondering if that was planned out in your thought. Was that like a conscious decision or consequence of the tale developing? Because I was fascinated by that aspect that it really struck me when I started Return Deity. That was just prologue, just a different feel than the other two.
Yeah, so that's a very, very perceptive question, Jarrod, and it's a writer's question. And the answer is yes, I planned out these prologues. One of the things you can do with a prologue as a writer is you can foreshadow what's to come. Mm-hmm. Basically, each of these three prologues, I hope, works as me saying to the reader, here's what to expect in this book. And you just nailed it there as you described each of them. So I'm trying to set up major themes. I'm trying to do some foreshadowing. So when you finish the book, go back to the prologue and see, oh, that's what he was telling us. That's what I'm trying to do there. So you're absolutely right with that question. Yep.
Well, I was just very happy that you didn't repeat yourself,
Yeah.
with each of the prologues. Each of them was distinct and unique, and really led into what the book singularly were.
Yeah, your prologue is an opportunity. And if you're writing a book, to tell your reader, hey, here's what to expect. So is the cover, of course. And I hope the cover also conveyed a kind of the right tone for each of the books too, because, book 2 has this, has a dragon on the back, right? So it's got conflict and violence and poor Sequara, having to deal out death when she wants to be a healer and all of that. So yes, you're absolutely right. That's a very perceptive question. Yeah. Well, anything else that you three want to get out or say before we conclude our discussion? Anything at all?
I just want to say that I really enjoyed your trilogy so far. And I think that as a writer, I've had so much to learn from in how you set this up and your format, but doing it in an original way. And I think that I have a great appreciation for how you have used the tools that have been around for a long time and make it your own. And I think that as a writer, that's a great, refreshing thing to learn. And I'm excited to finish the trilogy and to see and to get another story. And I can't wait to get another story in this world. So wonderful job, especially this is your debut trilogy, and I'm looking forward to reading more from you. in this. So I'm excited.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank all three of you, really. This has been a lot of fun for me. I hope it was for you guys. This was the inaugural Edan Trilogy discussion for me on this channel. So this was just a ton of fun. And I really do feel very, very grateful for the three of you being readers, and also for the reviews you've given me and of the first two books. And so appreciative and so glad that you were willing to spend this time with me, both in this world and here right now. Deeply, deeply appreciate it. So thank you all very much. There will be more of these discussions in the future, but do check out Mary's channel and Jarrod's channel. They'll be linked in the description. And if John Luke, you ever start a channel, I'll be shouting about it too. So, all right. Thank you all very much. And
Thank you.
till next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.